The rain came down in sheets over the Virginia countryside, a relentless, drumming gray that matched the mood inside the converted barn. Jace Hatch Henderson sat on the edge of a worn leather couch, a ceramic mug of coffee growing cold in his hands. The mug was a ridiculous thing, handmade and lopsided, a gift from a team guy's kid. It was the only splash of color in the otherwise masculine utilitarian space. The barn was his sanctuary, a place of exposed wooden beams and the faint but lingering scent of oil and leather from the tactical gear stored meticulously in the locked room upstairs. It was supposed to be quiet. It was supposed to be safe. But the quiet was the problem. For 18 years, Jace's life had been defined by noise. The thunder of rotors, the sharp crack of gunfire, the frantic, staticky burst of comms in his ear, the guttural roar of men in a fight. As a chief petty officer and a special warfare combatant craft crewman, SWCC operator, and he'd been the one driving the boats, putting SEAL teams on the beach and pulling them out of hell. He was a master of controlled chaos, a mechanic of mayhem. Now the only sound was the rhythmic thump of rain and the hum of the refrigerator in the small kitchenette. The silence was a different kind of enemy, one that didn't wear a uniform and didn't play by any rules he understood. His phone, a rugged military-grade brick, buzzed silently on the thick wooden slab that served as a coffee table, and the screen lit up with a name he hadn't seen in years, Sarah Jenkins. The name didn't immediately register. It wasn't a team guy, wasn't a number from the logistics office at Dam Neck. He picked it up, the cool metal a familiar weight in his palm. He almost let it go to voicemail. He let most things go to voicemail these days. But something made him swipe the answer icon. "Henderson," he said, his voice a low rumble, still carrying the clipped, authoritative tone of a man used to giving orders. "Jace, it's Sarah. Sarah Jenkins." The voice on the other end was hesitant, older, laced with a tremor he didn't remember. "From the USO thing in Norfolk. A few years back? You helped my husband, Tom, with his benefits." The memory surfaced, grainy but distinct. A crowded, overly cheerful USO function he'd been strong-armed into attending. A woman, pale and drawn, with a retired Marine in a wheelchair who looked lost, Tom Jenkins, or a double amputee from an IED in Helmand. Jace hadn't fixed anything, just cut through the red tape for them, made a few calls to guys he knew who knew guys. It was nothing. "I remember," he said, his gaze fixed on the rain streaking down the window pane. "How's Tom?" A pause, filled with the soft crackle of the connection. "Tom passed 2 years ago. It was peaceful in the end. The wounds, they just took their toll." Jace closed his eyes. Another name for the list. "I'm sorry, Sarah." He was a good man, a hard charger. "He was," she agreed, her voice strengthening slightly. "He always spoke highly of you, Jace. Said you were one of the real ones." The words landed strangely. He didn't feel real. He felt like a ghost haunting his own life. "I'm not calling about that," Sarah continued, her tone shifting, becoming more businesslike. "It's my niece, Maya Kincaid. She's a handful. She's been in some trouble. Nothing criminal, just lost. She's 19, angry at the world, bouncing between couches and dead-end jobs. My sister, her mom, she passed when Maya was 15. Cancer. It hit her hard. Maya's been drifting ever since." Jace remained silent, letting her talk. He had a feeling he knew where this was going, and he was already preparing his polite refusal. He wasn't a counselor. He wasn't a life coach. He was a boat operator who was learning how to be a civilian and failing spectacularly at it. My sister's last wish was for Maya to have a chance," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "A real chance. I can't give it to her. I'm too old, too set in my ways. She needs structure. She needs someone who won't take her crap, but who will understand where the crap comes from. Tom used to say you were the calmest man in a storm he'd ever met. He said you could look at chaos and just see the solution. Jace almost laughed. And he could see the solution to a malfunctioning .50 caliber or a compromised extraction route. He couldn't see the solution to his own crippling insomnia or the way his heart hammered in his chest in a crowded grocery store. "Sarah, I'm not set up for that," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I live alone. I'm still figuring out my own situation." "I know," she said quickly, "and I'm not asking you to adopt her. I'm asking if she could stay with you for a while, a month, maybe 2, just until she gets her feet under her. There's a community college near you with a good vet tech program. She loves animals, always has. She just needs a stable place to land while she applies, gets her financial aid sorted. A room, 3 meals, a firm but fair hand. Tom always said you had that, a way of being hard without being cruel." He thought about the spare room upstairs. It was full of boxes he hadn't unpacked, gear he hadn't touched, ghosts he hadn't faced. He thought about the silence that was slowly crushing him. He thought about the anger in a 19-year-old girl, an anger he understood all too well. It was the same anger he saw in the mirror every morning, the anger of a life ripped off course, of a future stolen. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. "Send me her number," he said finally, the words surprising him as much as they did her. "I'll talk to her. No promises." The relief in Sarah's voice was palpable. "Thank you, Jace." "Thank you. You won't regret it." He ended the call and set the phone back on the table. The rain continued to fall. The silence returned, but it felt different now. Charged, like the quiet before a mission brief, the weight of the unknown pressing in. Maya Kincaid arrived 3 days later, dropped off by a sullen-looking guy in a rusted-out pickup truck who didn't even get out. Jace watched from the barn's large sliding door as she hauled a single overstuffed duffel bag from the truck bed. She was a study in angles and sharp lines, tall and painfully thin, with a shock of choppy jet-black hair that fell over a pale, defiant face. She wore ripped black jeans, scuffed combat boots, and a faded t-shirt for a band he'd never heard of. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, a physical barrier against the world. She didn't look at the departing truck, just stared at the barn, at him, with a gaze that was equal parts challenge and exhaustion. As she trudged up the gravel path, and the duffel bumping against her leg, he noticed her expression shift. The defiance hardened into a smirk as she took in his appearance. Jace was in his uniform of isolation, worn jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and bare feet. He was broad-shouldered and solid, his brown hair cropped short, his face carrying the weathered calm of someone who'd seen too much. To Maya, he probably just looked like another middle-aged guy trying to play tough. "So," she said, and her voice laced with a sarcasm that was clearly her default setting. "You're the babysitter. My aunt said you were some kind of super soldier or something. You don't look like much." It was a test, a classic one. Poke the bear, see what happens. In the teams, a comment like that from a new guy would have resulted in a week of extra PT. Jace just looked at her, his expression unchanging. He saw the bravado for what it was, armor. He'd worn the same armor himself once. "I'm Jace," he said simply, turning and walking back inside. "Your room's upstairs, first door on the left. Don't touch anything in the locked room at the end of the hall." He didn't wait to see her reaction. He just went back to the kitchen and started making a sandwich. A few minutes later, he heard the heavy thud of her boots on the wooden stairs, then the slam of a door. The house absorbed the sound, and for a moment, the silence was back. It didn't last. An hour later, she clomped back down. He was at the small dining table, working on a complex knot pattern for a new piece of rigging, his strong, scarred fingers moving with practiced precision. "There's no TV," she announced, standing in the doorway to the kitchen, her arms crossed again. No, he agreed, not looking up. No Wi-Fi either? There's a modem. The password's on a sticker on the side. A pause. The password is fuckarounditis? All one word? It's a clinical term, he said, and the ghost of a smile touching his lips for the first time in weeks. He'd named his network years ago, a private joke for himself about the nature of civilian life. She snorted, a sound that was almost a laugh. You're weird. Yep. The days that followed were a masterclass in silent warfare. Maya treated the barn like occupied territory, and Jace like the enemy. She'd emerge from her room late in the morning, make herself a bowl of cereal, and then disappear again. Or sit on the back porch stairs, smoking cigarettes she thought he didn't notice, staring at the tree line. She never offered to help with anything. She never started a conversation. Her responses to his occasional questions were monosyllabic grunts. Jace, for his part, didn't push. He'd learned long ago that you don't charge a known enemy position without intel. He went about his routine. He'd wake before dawn and do a grueling workout in the small gym he'd set up in one corner of the barn's ground floor, pull-ups, kettlebell swings, calisthenics, his body moving through the motions with a muscle memory that was the only constant in his life. He'd make coffee, check his sparse emails, and then spend hours in his workshop, maintaining gear that no longer had a purpose, cleaning weapons that would never again be fired in anger. It was a meditation, a ritual. It was all he knew how to do. The impasse broke on a Thursday afternoon. Jace was outside, standing under the roof's overhang, watching the rain. It had become a habit. He'd listened to the different sounds it made on the metal roof, the gravel, the leaves. It was the only thing that could quiet the noise in his head. He heard the back door open and close, and then the soft scuff of her boots on the concrete floor as she came to stand a few feet away, also under the overhang. She didn't say anything. I just lit a cigarette and looked out at the rain, the smoke curling upwards and disappearing into the damp air. They stood like that for a long time. Minutes, maybe an hour. Just two people, watching the storm. The silence wasn't hostile anymore. It was just shared. Then, without looking at him, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual sarcasm. My mom used to do this, she said. Sit on our porch in the rain. She said it was God's way of pressure washing the world. Jace didn't respond. He just kept looking at the rain, letting her words hang in the air. When she was sick, at the end, she'd get me to open the window, even in the winter, just a crack, so she could hear it. Maya's voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. The nurses hated it, said it was bad for her, but she didn't care. She said the sound of rain was the only thing that reminded her she was still alive. Jace felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He knew that feeling. The desperate need for a sensory anchor to the present, to prove to yourself that you were still here, still breathing. My mom is gone too, he said, the words coming out quietly, rough. It was the first personal thing he'd shared. A long time ago, I was 18. Maya finally turned to look at him. Her dark eyes, usually so hard, were wide, searching his face. For a moment, the armor was completely gone. She just looked like a lost, scared kid. How did you... She started, then trailed off, as if she didn't know how to finish the question. How did you survive? How did you go on? He met her gaze. He didn't have an answer. I'm still figuring that out, he said honestly. She nodded slowly, a single, almost imperceptible movement. She turned back to the rain, took a long drag on her cigarette, and then let the smoke out in a slow, measured stream. The wall wasn't rebuilt. It was just lowered. For now. The days after that were different. The change was subtle, but to a man trained to read a room for the slightest shift in threat level, it was as clear as day. Maya started leaving her cereal bowl in the sink instead of on the counter. Once, he came back from a run to find she'd made a pot of coffee. It was terrible, burnt and weak, but she'd made it. He drank 2 cups without complaint. One evening, she wandered into the workshop while he was working on a piece of leather, crafting a new sheath for a hunting knife. She stood a few feet away, watching his hands. "What are you making?" she asked. "A sheath." "For a knife?" "Generally what they're for." She rolled her eyes but stepped closer. "Can I try?" He looked up at her, surprised. He considered it for a moment, then nodded. He pulled out a scrap piece of leather, a basic stitching awl, and some waxed thread. And for the next hour, he taught her how to saddle stitch. She was clumsy at first, pricking her finger once and swearing colorfully, but she was stubborn. She wouldn't give up. He'd correct her grip, show her how to pull the thread tight, and she'd listen, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she finished, the piece was crooked and the stitches were uneven, but she held it up with a flicker of pride in her eyes. "It's a coaster now," he said. She actually smiled, a real, genuine smile. It transformed her face. "A really ugly coaster. Functional is its own kind of beautiful." It was in one of these quieter moments, a week later, that the fragile piece was tested. Jace was in the kitchen, reading a book on marine diesel engines, when Maya came in, looking agitated. "I'm going out," she announced. He looked up. "Where?" "Out, with some people I met, in town." He set his book down. He'd seen the guys she was talking about. They hung out at the gas station and had the look of small-town troublemakers. He'd done his research. "The guys in the jacked-up truck with the stereo?" Her chin jutted out. "Yeah. What's it to you?" "They're trouble, Maya. You don't know them." "I know the type." He kept his voice level, calm. It was the same tone he'd used to talk a panicked young operator through a jammed weapon. "They're bored, they're angry, and they're looking for someone else to be angry with. Now that's not a crowd you want to run with." Her eyes flashed with the old defiance. "You're not my dad. You're not even my real babysitter. You're just some guy my aunt felt sorry for." The words were designed to wound. They were a grenade pulled from her arsenal of self-destruction. Jace felt the sting, but he didn't react. He'd been under fire before. He knew the best thing to do was let the explosion pass. "You're right," he said calmly. "I'm not your dad, and I'm not your babysitter. But I am the guy whose house you're living in, and I am the guy who promised your aunt I'd look out for you. My only rule is this: you don't bring that world into this house. If you go out with them and you get into trouble, I'll come get you. One time. No questions asked. But you don't bring them here, and you don't let them know where you're staying. That's the deal." She stared at him, her chest heaving, searching for a fight. But his calm was impenetrable. There was no anger to feed off, no authority figure to rebel against. He was just a solid, immovable object. She let out a frustrated breath, her shoulders slumping. "Fine," she muttered, and stormed back upstairs. He didn't hear her leave. He assumed she'd gone out the window or waited until he was in the workshop. He didn't check on her. He just went back to his book, the quiet of the barn feeling heavier than usual. At 2:17 a.m., his phone buzzed, an unknown number. He answered it on the first ring. "Nah, yeah?" A male voice, slurred and aggressive. "Yeah. Is this the emergency contact for Maya? This bitch is wasted and we're at the quarry. Someone's got to come get her before she does something really stupid." The line went dead. Jace was already pulling on his boots. He was in his truck and moving in under 2 minutes, his jaw tight, his mind clear. This was a mission now. Objective: extract the package. No emotion, no judgment, just execution. The quarry was a gaping wound in the landscape, its still black water reflecting the faint light of a cloud-covered moon. A beat-up truck was parked near the edge, its headlights off. He could hear shouting, laughter, the sound of breaking glass. As he got closer, he saw them. 3 guys, the ones from the gas station, were standing in a loose circle, laughing, and in the middle of them was Maya. She was stumbling, trying to push one of them away, her words slurred and angry. One of the guys grabbed her arm, yanking her towards him. Jace didn't turn off the engine. He didn't even put the truck in park. He just rolled to a stop, the headlights suddenly flooding the scene, pinning them like insects. He was out of the truck and moving before the door was fully closed. He didn't run. He walked, a fast, purposeful stride, his presence filling the space between the truck and the group. The guy holding Maya's arm saw him first. His eyes widened. "Who the hell are you?" Jace didn't answer. And he kept walking. He was within 10 feet now. The other 2 guys turned, their postures shifting from aggressive to uncertain. They saw a man who moved with an economy of motion, whose face was utterly blank, whose eyes were cold and assessing. It was the look of a predator, and every animal instinct they had told them they were no longer the top of the food chain. "Let her go," Jace said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the night air like a knife. It was the voice of absolute, unquestionable authority. The guy holding Maya hesitated, his bravado crumbling. He looked at his friends for support, found none, and let go of her arm as if it were on fire. Maya stumbled, her eyes wide and unfocused. She looked terrified. Jace took the last few steps and was in front of her. He didn't touch her. He just looked at the guys, his gaze moving slowly from one face to the next, memorizing them. "Get in the truck, Maya," he said, his voice soft now, just for her. She didn't move. She was frozen, a mix of shame and fear on her face. Jace finally looked at her. The coldness in his eyes softened, just a fraction. "Maya, it's time to go home." That word, home, seemed to break the spell. Her eyes welled up with tears. She nodded, a jerky motion, and walked unsteadily towards the passenger side of the truck. Jace waited until she was inside, then turned back to the 3 young men. He took one step towards them, and they all flinched back as one. "If I ever see any of you near her again," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing rumble, "we will have a very different kind of conversation. One you won't walk away from. Do you understand me?" They all nodded, mute with terror. Jace got back in the truck, did a perfect 3-point turn, and drove away, leaving them standing in the dark. The cab was silent. Maya was curled against the door, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He didn't say a word. He just drove. Back at the barn, he parked and cut the engine. The rain had started again, a soft, steady patter on the roof. "Go inside," he said. "Shower, sleep. We'll talk tomorrow." She looked at him, her face streaked with tears and mascara, her eyes full of 1,000 questions. Why did you come? I was so mean to you. I said those things." He looked at her, and for the first time, he let her see a little of what was behind his own walls. The weariness, the old pain, but also a deep, unshakable resolve. "Because you needed someone to show up," he said simply. "And that's what we do. We show up." The next morning, the air in the barn was thick with unspoken words. Jace was at the table with his coffee when Maya finally came down. She looked pale, hungover, and deeply ashamed. She didn't meet his eyes. She went to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and then came and sat across from him at the table. She stared at the wood grain for a long time. Finally she spoke, her voice a raw whisper. "I'm sorry. I know. I was so stupid. I wanted to feel something different. I wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere, anywhere." A tear slipped down her cheek and she wiped it away angrily. "They were just using me. I knew it. And I went anyway. Jace nodded slowly. Belonging is a powerful thing. We all want it, but you can't find it by fitting into a place that's wrong for you. You just end up breaking off the pieces of yourself that don't fit. She looked up at him then, a flicker of understanding in her tired eyes. I was angry too, he continued, his voice low. After my mom died, I was angry at the world. I joined the Navy looking for something, a place to put all that anger. I found it. I found a family. But I also found out that the anger doesn't just go away. You have to learn to live with it, to use it, or to aim it at something that matters. Is that what you did? She asked. Aimed it? He thought about the missions, the brotherhood, the cost. Yeah, for a while. It gave me purpose. It gave me a place. But it also took a lot. And when you leave that world, you have to figure out who you are without it. I'm still figuring that out. The confession hung in the air between them. Two people, from different worlds, both lost, and both trying to find a way to be in a world that didn't make sense anymore. Later that day, she came to him in the workshop. He was sharpening a knife on a wet stone, the rhythmic hiss-scrape, a calming metronome. Jace, she said. He looked up. The other night, when you came, you weren't angry. You were just calm. How do you do that? How do you stay so calm when everything is going to hell? He set the knife down and wiped his hands on a rag, and he thought about how to explain it. It's not that I don't feel it, he said slowly. The fear, the anger, it's all there. But in my old job, if you let that stuff take over, people die. You have to learn to put it in a box, to acknowledge it, but not let it drive. You see the situation for what it is, not what you're afraid it might be. You look for the one thing you can control, and you control the hell out of it. Like coming to get me, she said. Oh, that was the one thing you could control. He nodded. Yeah, everything else was noise. You were the mission. She was quiet for a moment, processing. I'm sorry I'm such a mess, she whispered. You're not a mess, Maya, he said, his voice firm. You're a kid who got dealt a bad hand. You're grieving, you're scared, you're trying to figure out who you are without the one person who always knew. That's not being a mess. That's being human. The tears came then, and the flood she couldn't hold back. She didn't try to hide them. She just sat on an old ammo crate in his workshop and cried. Jace didn't move to comfort her. He knew that wasn't what she needed. He just sat there, a quiet, steady presence, letting the storm pass. When the sobs subsided to hiccups, he handed her a clean shop rag. She took it, laughing weakly at the absurdity. Thanks, she mumbled, wiping her face. For what? For not treating me like I'm broken. For just being here. Or for showing up. He gave her a small nod. It was the only response he had. The next few weeks were a slow, steady process of decompression. Maya started going for walks in the woods. She'd come back with leaves in her hair and a little more color in her cheeks. She filled out the application for the community college, Jace sitting with her at the table, not helping, just being there for moral support. He helped her write the essay about her mom, and about how watching the veterinary staff care for her mother's service dog during her illness had sparked an interest in helping animals. One afternoon, she came running into the workshop, her phone clutched in her hand, her face alight with an expression he'd never seen on her before, pure, unadulterated joy. I got in, she yelled. Jace, I got in! They accepted me for the spring semester, and my financial aid came through. He stood up, and for a moment he didn't know what to do. In the teams, moments like this were marked with backslaps and crude jokes. That didn't seem right, so he just opened his arms. She hesitated for only a split second before launching herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. He hugged her back, a bit awkwardly, but genuinely. It was the first time he'd held another person in years, outside of a tactical context. It felt strange. It felt good. She pulled back, wiping happy tears from her eyes. I have to call my aunt. Oh my God, she's going to freak. She ran back inside, and Jace was left alone in the workshop, a strange feeling blooming in his chest. It took him a minute to identify it. It wasn't the adrenaline-fueled satisfaction of a successful mission. It was quieter, deeper. It was pride, and something else he hadn't felt in a very long time. A sense of purpose that had nothing to do with a uniform or a weapon. That evening, they sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Maya was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet. Jace, she said as the first stars began to appear. Yeah? Thank you. For everything. For not giving up on me. For seeing me. Not the angry girl I was showing everyone, but me. He looked at her, at the young woman she was becoming, and saw the ghost of the scared, angry kid who'd gotten out of a rusted-out truck just a few months ago. The change was remarkable. Oh, you did the work, Maya, he said. I just provided a place to do it. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. A pretty nice place, actually. They sat in companionable silence as the night deepened. The crickets began their chorus, and a soft breeze rustled through the trees. For the first time since he'd left the service, the quiet didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a friend. It felt like home. The next morning, Jace was in his workshop, and staring at the locked door at the end of the hall. It was the one room he'd never opened since moving in. The room where he'd stored all his gear, all his memories, all the pieces of the man he used to be. He'd been avoiding it for months. He walked to the door, pulled the key from his pocket, and unlocked it. He pushed it open. The room was neat, organized, a shrine to a past life. Plate carriers hung on the wall, their pouches still holding magazines. And helmets with night vision mounts sat on a shelf. A duffel bag in the corner held the uniforms he'd worn for 18 years. He walked to the center of the room and just stood there, surrounded by the ghost of Jace Henderson, SWCC operator. He expected the weight of it to crush him. The grief, the loss, the memories of the men who didn't come home. But it didn't. He felt the sadness, yes, the ache, but it was manageable. It was part of him, but it wasn't all of him anymore. And he heard a soft footstep behind him. Maya was standing in the doorway, her eyes wide as she took in the room. She didn't say anything, just looked from the gear to him, a question in her eyes. This was who I was, he said, his voice quiet in the still air. She nodded slowly, then stepped into the room and stood beside him. She looked at a photo pinned to a corkboard, a group of hard-faced men in combat gear, arms around each other, grinning at the camera. Is that your team? She asked. Some of them. They look like they were family. They were. She looked at him, then back at the photo. They're still your family, Jace. Just because you're not there doesn't mean you're not still a part of it. And you've got room for new family, too, if you want it. He looked at her, this angry, broken kid who had somehow, without either of them planning it, become a part of his life. A part of his quiet. He didn't have the words for what he felt, so he just put a hand on her shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. She leaned into it for just a second, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they'd forged in the quiet of a converted barn, away from the noise of the world. They stood there for a long time, two people from different wars, sharing the silence. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. Full of the past, full of the present, and for the first time in a long time for both of them, full of the quiet promise of a future. The rain began to fall again, a soft, gentle rhythm on the metal roof above them, a sound that was no longer a trigger, but a lullaby. The storm outside had passed, and the one inside was finally beginning to still.